Every once in a while, a game comes along that redefines a genre. Street Fighter II did it with the fighting genre. Outrun did it with the racing genre. And Double Dragon did it for the beat-em-up genre. With fists a-flying and legs a-kicking, the game revolutionized the two-player co-op arcade experience. What famous movie helped inspire the overall design of this game? What famous actor influenced the design of the main characters? So crack your knuckles and get ready to fight, because this is the history of Double Dragon. The year is 1986, and Techno's designer Yoshihisa Kishimoto is setting out to create a sequel to his massive arcade hit Neketsu Kuha Kunio-kun, in which you play as Kunio and you have to protect your pal Hiroshi from rival gangs. The game was based on Mr. Kishimoto's personal experience growing up getting into fights constantly throughout his school years. The other influence was the movie Way of the Dragon. To make the game more appealing to the Western market, they modified the look and storyline to resemble the 1979 movie The Warriors. Finally, they changed the name to Renegade. When Mr. Kishimoto set out to produce a sequel, his bosses wanted only one game, as they felt it was too costly to produce two versions of the same game. Another design request from the higher-ups was for two-player co-op. Twice the player, twice the profit is what Mr. Kishimoto was told. Taking his love for Way of the Dragon along with the last name of Lee for twin brothers Billy and Jimmy Lee, you end up with Double Dragon. Initially, though, the names of the characters were not Billy and Jimmy. In the arcade series, they went unnamed until Double Dragon 3. However, on the arcade game marquee, if you look closely on their arms, you'll see tattoos of the names Spike and Hammer, suggesting that these two might be the names of the characters. They were later referenced to as Billy and Jimmy Lee in the NES version, and other home versions soon followed suit. Double Dragon is a two-player beat-em-up action extravaganza in which you have to rescue your girlfriend Marion, who has been kidnapped by the Black Warriors gang. You take on the role of twin brothers Billy and Jimmy as you set across 4 stages, taking down numerous enemies that stand in your way. Enemies crawl out of the woodwork, some even carrying weapons to stop you. Another of the many firsts in this game is the ability to knock a weapon out of your enemy's hands and pick it up to use it against them. The weapons include dynamite sticks, baseball bats, chains, and oil drums. The game hosts a wide variety of maneuvers to use, including a headbutt and elbow, a hair pull, flying kick, shoulder throw, and the ability to grab your opponent from behind and let your partner pummel him. Another unique feature is the way the stages are set up. While there are only 4 stages, they are all linked together so it would appear as one long rolling stage. The graphics and animation are really well done, with both of them given a significant upgrade over the previous Renegade. The only downside, which if you're a fan of the original Double Dragon, you'll know what I'm going to say, is the slowdown. When asked about this, Mr. Kishimoto replied that he had tried to put too much into the game and ultimately failed. There is a nice twist at the end of the game. If you're playing in 2-player mode and both you and your partner make it all the way to the end, after you defeat the last boss, you have to then fight each other for the love and affection of Marion. There's one Easter egg at the beginning of the first level. When the garage door opens up, the car from Road Blaster, one of Mr. Kishimoto's first full-motion video games, is shown. Without question, this game would prove to be a monster arcade hit for Technos. Billy and Jimmy Lee were so popular, they would go on to cameo in other arcade games such as WWF Superstars. They would be selectable characters in the NES version of Super Spike V-Ball, and in River City Ransom for the NES. On one of the later levels, the Double Dragon music plays while you take down a pair of evil twins who are based on Billy and Jimmy Lee. In later years, throughout the life of the series, A cartoon and even an ill-fated live-action movie were produced. The home computer versions were distributed by Melbourne House and developed by Binary Design. Let's start out with a console release with the Atari 2600 version released by Activision. Why, oh why would they even attempt this? There was a resurgence in the mid to late 80s with producing new titles for this aging system. Somebody, somewhere at Atari, thought this would be a great idea. Sure, it's commendable that it even resembles Double Dragon, and I use that term loosely. If you stand about 60 feet from your monitor, then yes, it does resemble Double Dragon. Another problem that you'll see replicated across all of the various ports is that most only use one fire button, which is a bit awkward considering the arcade game uses 3. The gameplay is slow with horrible collision detection. I would avoid this one if I were you. Up next is the Spectrum version. Wow, is that some bad color clash or what? It feels like I'm looking at negatives from my dad's photo collection while playing this game. To be honest, it's not the worst of the 8-bit computers. The sprites are large and although monochrome are nicely detailed. The speed of the gameplay is not too bad with it being pretty close to the actual arcade game. Up next is the Binary Design version of Double Dragon for the good old Commodore 64. This version is essentially horrible. Microscopic sprites along with bland, uninspired backgrounds? How could it fail? This has to be a first, because the programmers included in the box a note that apologized for how bad the sprites looked due to them wanting to include the 2-player option. The playability is boring and very repetitive. The sound effects and music are very lackluster. 2 years later, Ocean Software released its port to the Commodore 64. And surprise, surprise, it's not very good either. This also features microscopic sprites, but at least this time they are animated a bit better. There is also a nice intro tune, as well as cutscenes between each level. The gameplay is a bit better than the Binary Design release, but that's not saying much. The Amstrad version is up next, and wow, the graphics are incredible for an 8-bit machine. They look to have been ported from the Atari ST version, and it works surprisingly well. There is a loss of color, but the sprites are very large, especially when compared to the Commodore 64 version. The speed runs at about 75% of the arcade game, so there is that to contend with. The playability is okay, but again, as with all the home computer versions, you only have one button to use. Very well done. The MSX version is here, and man oh man, I sure wish it wasn't. What in the world am I looking at? It looks like a fighting game made out of Play-Doh. Enemies will fall through the floor at random, so there is always that to look forward to. Stiff controls and horrendous sound. If the name of your game is Pain, then check this version out. Let's head back over to the consoles and check out the Atari 7800 version by Activision. This is one of the few home conversions that features the original arcade cinematic opening of Marion getting abducted. The sprites are nice and large and the speed is decent when compared to the arcade. We do get a conversion with 2 buttons this time around, so the playability is a lot better than the other versions. The MS-DOS version looks pretty good for a 1988 title. Using strictly EGA and CGA graphics, the sprites are nice and large and they make good use of the limited color palette. Playability is pretty good considering it's only 1 button. The internal PC speaker is all you have for the audio. The Atari ST version is up next, and it's a fair attempt, but unfortunately it just doesn't work. There is something off about the sprites as far as the design goes. The gameplay is decent with only 1 button, and the speed is fair. The audio is decent, but not quite as good as the Amiga. Speaking of the Amiga, this version is very similar to the Atari ST, although the colors have been improved. Another thing you'll notice is that the speed is a bit quicker here, which makes for a more fluid gameplay. The audio is a lot better on this version when compared to the Atari ST. The Sega Master System version was my favorite growing up as a kid. Not only does this version more closely resemble the arcade game's layout, but the 2-player mode is here as well, something the Nintendo version just didn't have. There are even 3 enemy characters on screen at once. This version is really well done from the graphics to the playability to the audio. Top notch and good stuff. Speaking of the NES version, This is the home conversion most people will recognize. Although it doesn't follow the arcade game's layout, it has been extended to lengthen the game. One major omission is the 2-player co-op mode. Another omission is that you can only have 2 enemy characters on screen at once. A level up system was also implemented. You start with a basic punch and a kick, and then more moves are unlocked as you progress through the game. The graphics are a good representation of the arcade game, although a bit on the small side, but to be fair, it does play really well. The Game Gear version is up next, and while the name of the game is Double Dragon, it's a brand new adventure and not based on the original arcade game. Even though both brothers are shown on the box, you only get to play as Billy, as this is strictly a solo affair. The viewpoint has been changed to 2D, which hinders the playability quite a bit. The graphics are nice with large detailed sprites, but the animation is extremely choppy, resulting in poor, broken gameplay. This is one of the worst Double Dragon conversions on any home console. The Game Boy version is very good with large detailed sprites. The game is loosely based on the NES version with different level designs. The game plays very similar to its big brother. There was a problem with screen blurring on the original Game Boy, which always resulted in a lower than usual review score. For people running this under emulation, it won't be a problem. The 2-player co-op mode is missing, just like in the NES version. The audio was really good, with a nice rendition of the theme song playing as you play. If you ever wanted to play Double Dragon with Coke bottle thick glasses on, then the Atari Lynx version is just for you. I would assume because the Lynx is a handheld and has a small screen, that the programmers decided to zoom everything in. While the sprites are nice and detailed, it really affects the gameplay because you can't see very far ahead of you, so enemies will pop out of nowhere. The speed is a little bit on the slow side, but the playability is very good. Again, the graphics are really nice and look almost exactly like the arcade game except for the zoomed in effect. Released in 1992 for the Sega Genesis by Accolade, this version is extremely close to the arcade game. Everything from the arcade game is here with a 2-player simultaneous action, but thankfully, none of the slowdown. The graphics are nice with large detailed sprites and plenty of color. Animation is very good and very similar to the arcade game. The Genesis audio chip helps out with some great tunes playing while you lay the smackdown on a Black Warriors gang. An excellent conversion that you should check out if you are a fan of the series. In 2003, Atlas Software released Double Dragon Advance for the Game Boy Advance. This was essentially an update of the original game with new stages spread throughout. The graphics and animation have also been updated with new enemies, some of which were lifted from other games in the series. You also have new moves to master. This is an excellent game and a worthy addition to the Double Dragon series. In 2007, on the Xbox Live Marketplace, Double Dragon was released. This was a straight-up port of the original arcade game running under emulation, but there was an option to turn enhanced graphics on, which resulted in better graphics and animation. The game would go on to spawn numerous sequels and spin-offs. From the arcade to the consoles, to the iOS and Android platforms, the series is still going strong with the Steam release of the latest Double Dragon released just last year. With a game this big, the merchandise was flowing like wine. From patches, to board games, to towels, to handheld games, to watches, and even to supermarkets. The merchandise was everywhere. Double Dragon is definitely a classic. Whenever people mention retro beat-em-ups, this is usually at the top of the list. This is the one that started it all, so if you have a mate around, give it a try. You'll be glad you did. Thanks for watching my video. Be sure and leave a like and also subscribe. Also hit that bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Also, if you'd like to support my channel, please do so on Patreon. I really would appreciate it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching my video. Be sure and leave a like and also subscribe. Also hit that bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Also, if you'd like to support my channel, please do so on Patreon. I really would appreciate it. Thanks for watching.